Welcome back to another episode of Believe in TCU. I'm Jackson James. Thank you guys for joining me for another episode. I mean, we've been grinding, posting at least 2 episodes a week, so make sure you guys subscribe. We only have a couple more weeks until the season. I mean, that's insane to think about. It's literally in a couple of weeks, so whatever you need in terms of TCU football, this is the place to be. We're going to be talking all things leading up to the games, and we'll be debriefing the games afterwards. So make sure you guys subscribe. Believe in TCU. We're trying to get, a lot more listeners because I love to hear from you guys about what your takes are on my takes. Right? It's a relationship. I give, you receive, and you give back. But anyways, I was going to go a different way. We can always continue talking about fall camp. Reports are pretty much the same from my last episode, so make sure you guys go tune in on my thoughts on the beginning of fall camp. But today, I wanted to do another little preview on the schedule, but in particular, one game. I think there's one game that is maybe the most underrated game on the schedule. This is one game that I haven't really seen too many people talk about, just in terms of the impact on the Frogs season and what it could mean for Sonny Dykes and the coaching staff. But I'll get into that into a second. But we've talked about, I did a top 5 most important games of the season, right? The top 5 most important games. This game's not on there, right? So if you're interested in that episode, I highly incline you guys to go over and listen to that because that's a very fun episode because I'd love to hear from you guys on your thoughts on that one. There are some quite obvious games that made the list, but there are a little bit of some other games that you maybe not thought were so important to the Frogs, but they were. But this game didn't make it, and if you've seen it in the title, maybe not. This is the TCU versus UCF game. This is the first Big 12 matchup for the Frogs, and I think this could have the chance to be a really sneaky game for the Frogs. So let's dive in. I first want to break down what we're looking at in terms of the Frogs' schedule, right? Because they start with UNC, then they host the Grambling Tigers, and then Arkansas State. And that's your 3-game home stretch. I know UNC technically counts as a home game, but that's obviously in Ireland. So you have back-to-back home games against fairly easy opponents, right? These games should have the backups in them by really the third quarter if you're TCU. But regardless, then you go on the road for your first true road game versus the UCF Golden Knights. And if you guys remember from 2024, the Golden Knights not the Golden Knights, just the Knights. They came over to Fort Worth and upset the Frogs 35-34 on a game in which the Frogs had a fair amount of control in. They felt confident. They ended up, UCF went on a late drive, ended up coming back and winning that one after TCU had a chance late on a game-winning drive. Their kicker missed the field goal, and that was really the first loss of what was to be a very rocky season. And here's another opportunity, just the area of which it's happening is flipped. It is in Central Florida. It's going to be a very important game for the Frogs, right? Not only is it the first Big 12 matchup, but it's also your first true road game. And I've talked about it. TCU has struggled on the road in the past, especially in the Big 12. And this is a game that doesn't have the highest stakes when you're talking about Texas Tech or even Baylor or Utah or even a road game later in the season at Arizona. This might be the second most important road game, but ultimately, if TCU loses this game, me included, the fans might lose a little hope on this football team. To lose a game that early, that would be really rough. But let's dive into why this game is a little scary. Because if it was a road game at West Virginia or Kansas, I don't think it would necessarily have, that much to say. But I dived into a little bit of the Knights splits, home and away splits. And this is very shocking because, again, it's a home game for them. So here's where I wanted to dive into it. You look at their home and road splits. The Knights didn't win a single game on the road last year. All of their wins came at home. They went 5-2 at home. And that is against fairly easy opponents in Jackson State. Who is this NCAA team? North Carolina, AT&T. and UNC last year. Those were 3 straight home games to start their 2025 campaign. Then they went on to beat West Virginia in Florida, and they finished off their season with their final win against Oklahoma State. So it wasn't necessarily great opponents in terms of Big 12 quality or even just out of conference quality, but the splits to me is a very telling stat on how this team can operate going into 2026. Looking at the splits versus home and away. Home, they average 235 yards passing. On the road, they average barely 200, right? So it's only a 35-yard difference in terms of averages per game. But that, as you see that, you're like, okay, definitely clearly better at home, as you should be. But then when you look at the rushing stats, oh, man, this is a massive, massive difference. 190 at home versus 112 on the road. They average about only 5 more attempts at home than they do on the road. So off rip, looking at those stats, you're like, okay, this offense clearly is better at home. You could blame that on the opponents, but I still think there is a little bit of home field advantage for the Knights offense. And when you look at the final offensive yards average per game, it's 425 at home versus 313 on the road. And I'll touch on this before we go any further. That road schedule wasn't the hardest thing in the world. It was at Kansas State, at Cincinnati, at Baylor, at Texas Tech, and BYU. So you definitely had those tough ones in the BYU and Texas Tech matchups, but they lost by 2 scores against Kansas State. They lost by a score against Kansas. They lost 20-11 against Cincinnati in Cincinnati. And they got blown out by Baylor 30-3 in Waco. So this team, one, wasn't good last year, but the stats may prove they could be a sneaky home team, especially this season. And to finish off these offensive split stats, rushing stats, they average 2 more touchdowns at home than they do on the road. And let's see, the turnovers. Turnovers are fairly even. It's 0.9 at home versus 1.2 on the road. For interceptions, I say for total turnovers, it's 1.1 to 2. So they're clearly more turnover prone on the road than they are at home. So it's not necessarily that much glaring of a difference, but just wanted to shout that out to you guys. But let's take a look at the defensive splits, because I do think this is another interesting little tidbit. As we take a look at the road and home splits, at home they give up only 144 passing yards. On the road, they gave up 241 passing yards per game on average. If you look at the attempts, fairly the same, only roughly 3 more attempts on the road that opponents have tried versus at home. At home, they're limiting the passing percentage to 56 versus 72 on the road. This would be a completely different vibe if it was in Fort Worth, but it being in Central Florida could be very tricky for the Frogs. Passing or rushing wise, they give up 136 at home versus 170 on the road. They give up about 1 touchdown rushing wise at home versus 2 on the road. And then total offense given up 280 at home versus 412 on the road. That is almost a 150-yard difference between home and away. That is just insane on paper. Now, look, we talked about the opponents. The home opponents weren't anything glamorous. TCU, you could make the outside of those 2 teams in Texas Tech and BYU, were better than the rest of their away opponents. Their away opponents, but they clearly are better than all of their home opponents from last year. But if UCF clearly produces better at home, again, it could be very tricky for the Frogs. And so why do these splits? Why does this matter? Well, it's because, again, this game has been very underrated, and let me get to that in just a sec. So why is TCU versus UCF the most underrated game of the season? Well, it comes at a very tricky time for the Horned Frogs. Like I just said with that schedule, you have your 3 opening games, right? You have a week 0 matchup against North Carolina. Then you have a week off. Then you have the 2 easy non-conference games until you have to go on the road in the final week of September to play the Knights in Central Florida. So, but you're like, okay, they should be well prepared after those 2 home games. It's the first Big 12 game. And yes, but when you look at that next game, the BYU matchup on October 3rd, that to me, that is the opportunity really for the Frogs to show, hey, we are different than just above average. We are different than, being above average in the Big 12. But this UCF game could almost be a reality check for the Horned Frogs, right? Because if they win that game, we'll be like, okay, they should have won that game, right? I'd expect them to be a fair 7-point favorite, maybe a 10-point favorite at most in that game. I would have to see how UCF comes out this season. Taking a look for them in 2026, they start their season off against Bethune-Cookman Wildcats at home. Then they travel on the road to play Pitt, and then they're back at home versus Georgia State, and then they play TCU. So for the Knights, it is a little bit difficult. You got to pay attention to that Pitt game in week 2, but regardless, they're playing an easy game before TCU, so both these teams should be somewhat focused, I should say. You know how, in the SEC, Bama would schedule a cupcake before the Iron Bowl. Could be similar vibes to this one. Obviously, you're not scheduling a cupcake versus a fellow Big 12 team, especially when it's a non-rival. That would just be ludicrous. But again, so both these teams are coming in off fairly easy opponents. But for UCF, they travel to Houston the week after. Meanwhile, TCU hosts BYU in probably their most important game in that first 5. So TCU can't let this game get past them. If they were to drop this game, it would set them back massively in the Big 12. Because let's say you have them at 10 wins, 10-3 record, or 10-2 record in the Big 12. Where does that put them in terms of the standings? Well, if they're 10-2, where do the 2 losses come from? Let's say they lose against Tech and they lose against Arizona, right? But they win at home. They're undefeated at home. Well, that's wins over BYU and Utah. Those are 2 high-quality wins. But if you slip in a UCF loss, then your room for error in those other games is so small. There's almost no room for error. It is just an opportunity the Frogs cannot let get past them. Now, I'm going to do my season predictions here in a couple of, about a week or so. A week from kickoff. And I feel fairly confident about this matchup. Look, you can take those splits and be like, they're better at home for sure. But UCF definitely wasn't a good team last year. Now they have undergone some changes, right? New quarterback and whatnot. So it could be definitely a different vibe for the Knights this year. But looking at the predictions and where they're at, this should be a game where TCU wins. I'm not going to say comfortably because you can never predict a Big 12 game to be comfortable. But I do think going in, TCU should have firm control. Now, again, is that going to be the case? We'll have to see. But if they, get caught in a trap game situation where it's like, hey, we got BYU next week. They're looking really good. They're ranked now. We got to win at home. This could be a huge win for our program. And then you let one slip. It could prove to be an awful situation for the Horned Frogs. But I want to know your guys' thoughts on this. I think then, again, when you're looking at this schedule, I think there's potentially 3 underrated games on the schedule that nobody's really talking about. The first one would be the UCF game. The next one would potentially be Kansas at home, and also Kansas State. I kind of want to merge that into 2. And then ultimately that Arizona game. I don't think anyone's super confident going into that Arizona game, looking at the schedule just on paper, especially with how Arizona played last year, their quarterback situation coming in this year. It looks like they'll be pretty good. And so I don't think that one's necessarily as much of an anticipated game. I think that one's more anticipated than those other games, but still, I'm still fairly excited for this year. Let me know your guys' thoughts on UCF this year as TCU will travel to them on September 26th. I believe that's a week 5 matchup. This week 0 thing is completely messing me up. I mean, I'm like, oh, they play UNC week 1. Well, no, it's technically week 0, and then they have a bye week. It just messes up the whole schedule. But anyways, let me know your guys' thoughts. Again, this is a sneaky game. Am I crazy for saying this? Now, again, you can make the argument, oh, every game's important, but I think this game could be sneaky for the Frogs, so they better come prepared after playing Arkansas State. So let me know guys your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast. We've been blowing up in terms of downloads, so I really appreciate all of you guys listening to this podcast. It's been really fun. We're only a couple more weeks until playoffs, and we're going to start maybe doing some predictions here sooner rather than later. So make sure you guys stay listening. This is your one-stop shop for everything TCU football. This has been Believe in TCU. I'm Jackson James. Thank you guys for listening.